On this week's 51%, we hear from Stony Brook University's Dr. Brooke Ellison about her new memoir, Look Both Ways, reflecting on the lessons she's learned while living with a disability.
There is, what I've come to understand, a skill set that you develop by virtue of living with a disability, your leadership skills and resilience and creativity and problem solving, like really important things that have made me who I am.
I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. Today we bring you a conversation with Dr. Brooke Ellison, an associate professor of health policy and medical ethics at New York's Stony Brook University on Long Island. You may be familiar with her story from her 2002 memoir, Miracles Happen, and the TV movie it inspired, titled simply The Brooke Elliston Story. As Ellison notes, the very fact that she could speak with us today is the result of several medical miracles. When she was just 11 years old, Ellison was hit by a car while walking home from school. The accident left her quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down, and dependent on a ventilator to breathe and talk. But that hasn't stopped her at all from having a full life, or building a hell of a resume in the process. And as Ellison says, she's thrived as a result of her disability, not in spite of it. Ellison has earned multiple degrees from Harvard University in neuroscience and public policy. She's run for political office and advocated for stem cell research. She joined the board of directors of the New York Civil Liberties Union in 2017 and was chosen to be a Truman National Security Project political partner in 2018. And of course, she's been in love and enjoys quality time at her Long Island home with her friends and family. In her new book, Look Both Ways, Ellison returns to the story of her accident and life with quadriplegia with the same vulnerability and strength shown in Miracles Happen, but with a more mature perspective. Ellison says she hopes to pass along some of the lessons she's learned, both personal reflections and observations about society's broader treatment of the disability community.
I knew for a long time after I published Miracles Happen that I wanted to write another book, but I wasn't sure what kind of tone it was going to take, if it was going to be just a continuation of kind of a chronicling of my life. It was right before my 40th birthday, and I became quite sick. I was battling a pressure ulcer on my left leg, and it can be quite life-threatening. It can be infiltrated with all sorts of infection and that sort of thing. It really caused put somebody's life at risk. And after that, I said, I know that I need to get my thoughts down and just start thinking a little bit more cohesively about things I've experienced. And that was really the impetus behind Look Both Ways.
Before we really start, I just want to say I really like the title, Look Both Ways. I mean, you say it's a little tongue-in-cheek, of course, but I think it also really gets across that idea of just coming at life with different perspectives.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we tend to be a little bit myopic, and especially when we face challenge. It becomes all-encompassing. That's the only thing that we can see, really. But our lives are much richer than that. So that's kind of the real truth behind the title.
In one of your early chapters called Mechanics, you mentioned that you're often faced with questions about the physical aspects of your day-to-day life. And you even endeavor to answer a few that people are maybe too hesitant to ask in person. But you also say that these things are just mechanics. This is just what you have to do. It's like looking at someone's medicine cabinet, and at the end of the day, it's really not all that interesting as much as what you have to say. On a deeper level, what do you feel you have learned about your disability since your first book?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I spent 7.5 months in rehabilitation, and that was a really critical time in my life. I learned how to do the mechanical things that are associated with disability. I learned how to drive a wheelchair. I learned how to breathe on a ventilator. I learned kind of just how to integrate disability into my life, how to accommodate my own life to a world that was not built for me. And I think that's almost how a rehabilitation orientation towards disability is structured, right? Like you need to accommodate yourself to a world that's going to be resistant to you. And I think that was possibly not necessarily the best standpoint for me to enter the world after my accident. Like, I didn't feel quite as empowered as I ought to have felt. I've almost felt ashamed of my disability. I felt like, oh, this is not something I should think about or talk about, or we should keep this hidden or not feel proud about. I think that was overall detrimental to my growth and to my understanding of myself, even to the point where I thought that, I wasn't necessarily good enough for relationships in my life, or that anybody who was befriending me was doing it out of charitable kind of sympathy point of view. And that's not at all how I understand myself. It took me some years to get to that point where I could say, wait a second, no, I'm a person of value. Everybody who I've come to know who experiences disability are among the most creative, the most brilliant, the most resilient people I could ever anticipate meeting. And, my presence in the world is one of tremendous value, one of tremendous worth. There is what I've come to understand, a skill set or like an epistemology that you develop by virtue of living with a disability, one that's based on all of these really important virtues like your leadership skills and resilience and creativity and problem solving, like really important things that have made me who I am. And, I can't talk about my accident or the experiences that I have undergone without also thinking about the circumstances in those, in that light. And that is, I think, a really important lesson for me to have learned. I think it's an important lesson for the world to learn as well, especially as we talk more increasingly about opportunities for greater inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and what those concepts actually mean. Very frequently, they don't include people with disabilities. I think largely for that reason, because we don't necessarily always think about disability to be on par on a kind of normative basis as everybody else, but I think that very much is the opposite. So that is a fundamental lesson about disability that I wish I had learned early on. Like, you can learn to become accustomed to the mechanical changes in your life, right? Kind of the technical changes in your life, but the really deep adaptive ones take a lot more time to become accustomed to and to come to terms with.
Were there parts of the book that were particularly powerful for you to revisit, or something I guess you maybe liked looking back on?
Oh gosh, there are several chapters that were really powerful, really difficult to write, like not necessarily fun, but I really felt were very kind of cathartic and important for me to write, right? So like chapter 3, right, the chapter that I kind of wrote about my family, my experience as the person with the disability in the family, like that was a really difficult one for me to write. I remember being in my bedroom, crying as I was writing, forcing myself to be really introspective and really kind of self-analytical in how I positioned myself, all the years ago, at the time of my accident, and really even modern times, thinking about myself as the only person who was affected by my injuries and by my accident, whereas everybody in my family really was in different ways, and how I needed to rethink assumptions that I made about everybody else. Like that was a really difficult but important chapter to write. The I Love chapter was, I think, also equally emotional, but liberating at the same time, allowing me to talk about disability and love and romance and some of this kind of the frustrations I've had in those areas, but also senses of liberation and freedom, and how I define myself in terms of my relationships. Like that was really like a valuable chapter for me to write.
I really liked your reflections on love, because I feel like that's a perspective we don't often hear about. And I don't know, it takes a certain amount of vulnerability, I think, for any of us to talk about love, so I've just always got a lot of appreciation for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, like, especially for people with disabilities, right? It's almost like a taboo thing, right? You talk about love, you can talk about disability, but never the twain shall meet, right? That kind of thing. I think that's really unfortunate. I think that helps to, or works to perpetuate a lot of the stereotypes that we have about who is deserving of romantic relationships and who isn't. Like, I'm at a point in my life where I will not tolerate that, that kind of presupposition that somebody with a disability or somebody facing any kind of challenge ought not to find him or herself in a relationship. I think that is antiquated thinking. And, I think we're at a time societally where we need to think about things much differently than we have.
Well, you made headlines when you ran for the New York State Senate on Long Island in 2006 as a Democrat. What did you take away from that experience, and would you ever consider running for office like that again?
Yeah, so running for political office was one of the most gratifying and enriching endeavors that I have ever undergone. Like, before I decided to do that, I was extremely kind of introverted and a bit meek, and like you're not even self-confident enough to run for student government, as a junior high school and high school student. But then here I was, looking to take on an incumbent who had been in his seat for many years, it was extremely liberating. It taught me about my own sense of activism and advocacy and finding my own voice and talking about issues that I thought I didn't have the capacity to even talk about, and taking on a challenge other than just my physical challenge, right? Taking on one that was extremely personal and societal at the same time. We're not really different, right? Irrespective of political party or ideology, we all care about the same things. You want to have a future that is worth living into, and people who love us around us, right? Similar things, irrespective of what our ideology might look like or might be. So when the outcome of the election didn't go in my favor, I was certainly upset about it, but knew that I had run up a very positive campaign, one that generated a lot of really important attention. It allowed me to talk about issues that I really cared about, and in addition to that, highlight who is in the position to do certain things and who isn't, right? I think we have different societal beliefs about who should sit in public office and who shouldn't, right? We have heuristics in our heads about what a politician looks like. And I wanted to shake that up a little bit. And I think that was really important for me. And the work that I've done ever since then has been really highlighting these same issues and talking about things that are of concern to me that I think I never would have had the capacity to do before. So yes, I think about running for public office a lot. It's not something that I would ever rule out doing again. I wanted to make sure that if I were to do it again, it would be because I wasn't making as much difference doing whatever it is I was doing at the time. Like, I would want it to be because I felt like that was the right thing for me to do on a social scale, not for a personal reason.
One of the biggest issues you ran on was increased funding for stem cell research. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you served on the ethics committee for the state stem cell board as well, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What was that like? Admittedly, I don't really know anything about stem cell research, but why has this issue been so important to you? And what do you people commonly get wrong about it?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So actually, even though I didn't win the election, the then incoming gubernatorial candidate, Elliot Spitzer, he decided to incorporate that into his campaign. And shortly after he was elected, he put into place what was called the Empire State Stem Cell Board, right? So a New York's funding initiative through New York State to fund different forms of stem cell research. At that point in time, we were living in a political environment where the federal funding for stem cell research was quite limited. And in different states, notably California, were taking this work on themselves in kind of a different structure than ever had been done before to fund research at the state level, because it's such a valuable line of biomedical research. So this was a major public funding initiative, I think $600 million. And those who were overseeing the allocation of funds are divided into two different committees: the funding committee that would allocate funds to grants and to researchers doing work throughout New York State, and then the ethics committee, which is what I served on. And that created the ethical framework within which funding would be allocated. And so this was a major triumph. And then in that capacity, I learned a lot about medical ethics, science ethics, and what that's all about, how different parts of our culture influence science policy making, and then ultimately the kind of knowledge that's created, right? When you think about that, it seems kind of a little bit astonishing that ideology can ultimately influence the kind of knowledge that we create for the world, right? That's pretty astonishing. So I actually ended up writing my PhD dissertation on that topic and how stem cell policy has been developed in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, and in China, with different kind of cultural forces affecting how policy has been created and ultimately the kind of work that's being done in each of these nations, which I think is pretty interesting and pretty valuable. And because of that, I've integrated science ethics into many other avenues of science, biomedical research, first and foremost, for sure. And then aspects of climate change research, nuclear technology, all sorts of questions that have deep ethical implications to them. So I'm extremely excited about the future of stem cell research. So for those who are not familiar, it has the opportunity to create treatments and therapies to many different diseases and conditions that have for a very long time gone without any capacity for treatment or for cures. That's an issue that I have tried to trumpet as much as I possibly can in various aspects of work that I've done, whether it's as a professor at Stony Brook University or as a nonprofit leader. I had founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to informing people about what stem cell research is all about. I think there's a tremendous misunderstanding of what it's all about. I think the time it was making its most visible entree into the world was a time when science wasn't really being appreciated to the same extent that it ought to be. And I think that's been detrimental to the entire field. So I think its potential is tremendous. I've felt quite proud to help pave the way for the work that many scientists are looking to do and how they want to change the world. And the scientists I've come to know and to meet are so dedicated to solving really difficult challenges. And if I can be a part of that, it's been quite a privilege.
We're speaking with Dr. Brooke Ellison, author of Look Both Ways. You've long been pro-treatments and pro-cures, but you mentioned in the book that stance can be a little controversial in the disability community. Why is that?
There is a belief among people with disabilities in the disability community that to talk about cures is essentially to devalue the lives that they experience, right? So if we're talking about curing a condition like spinal cord injury, right, the implication is that your life is not good enough. Living with spinal cord injury, right? That's something that we need to fix, and that your life is a manifestation of some kind of medical failure that we have not been able to rectify up until that point. And I understand that. I understand the concerns that go along with that. But at the same time, I know that there are many people for whom living with a disability is not necessarily their chosen way of life, and they would like to do things that they have done before. I think that we need to structure things so that we're not always talking purely in terms of curing, right? That's not the only way that we understand disability, in terms of we need to get you out of this situation as quickly as we possibly can. I think there are many human rights related issues that we need to be thinking about and talking about so that people who live with disability can also have rich and full lives at the same time. But in the same conversation, we should be thinking about offering people, the choice to live however they so choose. And I also am fully aware in talking to families of people who have been diagnosed with conditions like ALS or Parkinson's that advances in stem cell science can potentially change what would be considered a death sentence for many people, right? And that is, I think, a tremendous breakthrough in science that I think we should also appreciate, that we're not always just talking about treatments for one particular condition, but treatments that could help people irrespective of what they might be facing.
Now, your first book, Miracles Happen, was turned into a TV movie directed by Christopher Reeve called The Brooke Elliston Story. What was it like working with Reeve and seeing your life being portrayed on the screen like that?
Oh gosh, so I remember quite vividly when Chris first called my home. I had just graduated from college. He had read about me in the New York Times. There was a cover story in the New York Times, and that was just gobsmacking, just like totally astounding because of the movie that was made about my life. It's my life story has been told really just all over the world. And people reach out to me for all different reasons. People have seen the film and have found it relevant to their lives in some way, either because they've either experienced some kind of challenge or are experiencing disability specifically. And like that is pretty incredible. That I have found to be just so powerful and not a way I could have ever imagined my life unfolding. If somebody were to have told me before my accident that you would become paralyzed tomorrow and your life would be very different, I don't know if I would have had the ability to take on that kind of information or felt like my life would have amounted to very much. Here I am all these years later, seeing how people have been affected by some of the things that I've experienced and have sought a way through challenges that they may be experiencing. Like, that's pretty incredible for me.
Lastly, what do you hope readers most take away from Look Both Ways?
I write in the prologue when I wrote Look Both Ways. I didn't want to write a book about disability. But I've come to understand that disability is a very profound example of the challenges that we all experience and how they can sometimes feel all-encompassing or like our lives are devoid of meaning or that our lives are some less valuable version of an idealized way our lives could have been. Right? That I know that I've fought that many times in my life, feeling like my life could have been something else or could have been some better version of what I've experienced since my accident. And like that is, I think, a fallacy. I think it's an unfair fallacy for us to put ourselves in. All of those things are purely hypothetical, right? There's no one way our lives could have been or right way our lives could have been. And it is because of the challenges that we experience that really make us who we are, right? Make the difficulty that we experience, irrespective of what it might look like, gives us the capacity to realize parts of ourselves that I think we never would have had the opportunity to before, right? To find strengths that we have, to find paths forward, and to think creatively about a life that has many dimensions and many facets to it. Like all of these things, I never would have had the capacity to understand about myself were it not for the challenges that I've undergone and the disability that I have experienced. And we could become stronger, more powerful, more resilient, and more broadly thinking people, irrespective of what our life might entail. And that goes for disability, that goes for any challenge that we might encounter. And if my life can resonate with other people and help them find a path through some of the things that they might experience, I will view my life as having been quite powerful and quite meaningful, especially in a set of circumstances that for some might seem meaningless.
Dr. Brooke Ellison is an associate professor of health policy and medical ethics at Stony Brook University. Her latest memoir is Look Both Ways, reflecting on her experience as a woman with a disability. It's out now with small batch books. You can learn more about Brooke and Look Both Ways at brookeellison.com. Brooke, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
We're going to switch gears before we go to bring you a story from New York's North Country. Earlier this year, the Clinton Community College Center for Governance hosted a Women in Politics forum to highlight local women who have devoted their careers to public and community service and examine the unique challenges female officials face in office and on the campaign trail. WAMC's Pat Bradley tuned into the event and brings us more.
It brought to the stage current and retired women to discuss their careers in politics and community service. Plattsburgh, New York Town Councilor Barb Hebert first ran in 2016 and has now served on that board for 7 years. She began the forum by discussing the barriers she considered before running for office.
There are times where you just need to plunge in. The question isn't why, and you start looking at your confidence level if you should run or do this, but it was more why not. So I decided just to jump in.
Retired legislator Sarah Rowden was on the Clinton County Legislature from 2000 to 2013. In 2016, she served an additional 6 months, filling a vacant term. She says just before the forum, she found an essay on her computer she had forgotten she wrote on what she learned as a county legislator.
It said there were 3 rules that guided me in my political career. Keep perspective, don't take it personal, and keep your sense of humor. And I tried to always do that.
Plattsburgh businesswoman Patty Waldron has served in the Clinton County Legislature representing Area 6 for 10 years. She says she was happy being in business and was approached 3 times before deciding to run. She has a couple more years before term limits block a re-election run, a policy she supports.
I think it's a good rule. And as I get older, there's younger views, especially with the issues we're dealing with today nationally. I think it's very important that we move on.
The trio discussed whether party labels are important at the local level. Rowden says during her tenure, the legislature prided itself on bipartisanship.
We came close to a gender line, but we never had a party line vote. And it had been a fairly partisan legislature before we came on, and we made some changes. And I think it set the stage for future legislatures.
Asked how they deal with sexism and discrimination, Rowden noted that it's not just women dealing with bias in politics.
You know, it took a long time for women to get into politics, and there are still some struggles. The recent issue that has occurred in Tennessee, shows we're still living with a lot of that lack of diversity and discrimination. But taking this back to women, women tend to look at things broader and more of how a decision is going to impact on a community-wide basis. That's why it's important for women to be in politics.
Waldron weighed in, noting that women haven't reached political equity yet.
We're getting there, but there's this old guard out there, strong-holding, really insecure of the fact that we actually might break through. And it's a different generation now coming up. So I think women in politics is seriously important right now.
Other topics that were discussed during the forum included the challenges of getting younger women interested in politics, the impact of national polarization in politics, and committee work and responsibilities. Audio is courtesy of Mountain Lake PBS. I'm Pat Bradley, WAMC News.
Thanks for listening to this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King, with help from our associate producer, Jody Cowan. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartock, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Just a reminder that you can listen to 51% anytime at WAMCpodcasts.org or wherever you get your podcasts. On social media, we're at WAMC Radio, and you can stay in the loop by signing up for our weekly newsletter, Airwaves, at WAMC.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King for 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. The night air down the hall